If you would like a free newsletter on this or other subjects, just give us a call at Christian Answers. The phone number is area code 512-218-8022. That's 512-218-8022. Or you could email us at cdebater@aol.com. That's cdebater@aol.com. Thank you.
Greetings and welcome once again to our program. I'm Larry Wessels, your host, and I want to thank you for joining me today. Well, today I'm doing kind of an unusual thing. I'm here by myself doing a solo act. For a long time, if you're a regular viewer, you've always seen me interviewing different Christian experts on different subjects and so forth, but today I'm just kind of doing a solo flight on a subject that I think a lot of people may be interested in. The topic today is Jehovah's Witnesses. And if you'll stay with me, I think you'll find it to be very enlightening as we'll study together who are these people that come knocking at our door, usually at an inconvenient time. And from my own personal experience, I find that they usually seem to come on a Saturday morning or a Saturday afternoon when the weather's good. I haven't found them come by when the weather's bad, but I find them coming by when the weather's good. But if you are interested in this kind of subject, then stay with me for the next half hour, and we'll take a look into the Jehovah's Witnesses and what they believe, and we'll try to analyze it from a Christian Orthodox evangelical viewpoint and contrast the differences, how they differ and what they believe as to what an Orthodox Christian would believe, going according to the Word of God, the Bible. Okay, with that established, I'd like to lead off our conversation here with a passage of Scripture out of 1 Timothy chapter 4. And what it says is, "Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to the seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry and commanding to abstain from meats, which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving of them which believe and know the truth." Okay, what we have here is a scripture that says that in the last times the Spirit speaketh expressly, that some will give heed to seducing spirits and, of course, doctrines of devils. So, what I'm going to discuss today, and I haven't established it yet with facts and evidence, but I think I will as we proceed through this series of programs. This is show number 1 in this particular series. I'm going to talk about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I believe that the Jehovah's Witnesses fulfill the scripture that I have just quoted out of 1 Timothy chapter 4. They teach doctrines of devils. They have taught these kind of doctrines about forbidding to marry and these other things, the abstaining and so forth. And we're going to take a look at who these people are and do they fit the category of this verse that I've just begun the series with. So far I haven't established it, but I hope to do so as we learn together in this series. Now, as you can see, I have a chartboard up here, and I have 2 books up here, and I guess I would like to start with this one here first that my pointer's coming in on, and so we can bring the camera in a little closer. We'll take a look at the very founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses. This man is, as you can see here, Charles T. Russell, or Charles Taz Russell. And this is the man that began the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, started the Jehovah's Witnesses, as they're now known. They weren't known as the Jehovah's Witnesses until 1931 at a Watchtower convention, but back when they started this, they were just known as like International Bible Students and so forth. Zion's Watchtower, we'll get into all those details here shortly. But this man is the one that's responsible for starting the Jehovah's Witnesses. He began it back in around 1879. He was the son of a men's clothing store owner, and took over those businesses, and then decided to go ahead and sell those businesses off, take the money, and begin printing his own newsletter, which was known as Zion's Watchtower, announcing Jehovah's kingdom and all that, as we'll study more into here shortly. But 1879, he was in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, and around the Pittsburgh area in Pennsylvania. And once he sold the men's clothing store and so forth, he put it into publishing these magazines. He started with a class of about 6 people who believed what he had to say. He had never had any real theological training or study. He simply got these people to go to his Bible study, printed this newsletter, teaching doctrines, and one thing led to another. He had some good financial backing from selling the business and so forth. And as the years went by, this organization started out of Pennsylvania has grown to literally, I believe, at this moment, at the time of this taping, over between 5 and 6 million adherents. 6 million, close to 6 million Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide. And it all started back around 1879. And so we know at the time of this taping, it's only been going on for a little over 120 years or so. And not bad for a man that just starts his own religion over there in Pennsylvania, and then next thing you know, a little over 100 years later, he's got millions of people believing what he was teaching, even though he had no formal theological training, didn't have any understanding of the original languages of the Bible, like Greek or Hebrew. In fact, he was even called on that in one of his, I believe it was one of his divorce trials that he had when he was divorcing his wife. In fact, I happen to have the transcript of that entire fiasco around here. In fact, I believe on the board that we just looked at, this booklet, as a matter of fact, is a transcript of some of the court proceedings where it was established that he actually, when he was divorcing his wife, Maria, he was accused of being a child molester. And it's all in this booklet, and once again, there's going to be a lot of material. I don't have that much time in each one of these shows to get into every last detail. I'll just skim over the top, but you're more than welcome to write our ministry or call the number on your screen, and we'll be glad to provide this documentation, this information that will substantiate these things that I'm saying throughout this program. But this is the actual court case transcript as he was divorcing his wife, Maria F. Russell. And of course, these divorce proceedings were taking place around 1903, 1906, and so forth, well before, well into the fact that he was running the Watchtower organization at that time. But this is the man that began it all, and we have complete information on him if you like more details. And of course, I've got another thing up here which asks the question, if we get a zoom in of this from one of our camera angles, it says, "Who is the faithful and wise servant?" And of course, we have a picture here of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society building, the headquarters in Brooklyn, New York, here on the front of this book. And of course, this is a big old thick book on the study of the authority of Jehovah's Witnesses and how their authority for all their Watchtower magazines, their Awake magazines, as they print out by the millions each month in over 100 languages going worldwide. It's published out of these headquarters you just saw in Brooklyn, New York, and they are supposedly Jehovah's mouthpiece for teaching truth around the world as they proclaim it, and that the only way to salvation is through them and through their governing body that's located there in Brooklyn, New York. And so I just wanted to show you a little bit here of the background in a brief, simple sort of way. We're not going into super extensive detail at this point. Like I say, and I'll say it throughout this series, the documentation is available. If you question anything I happen to say during this presentation, feel free to call or write. We can provide you with information and documentation for the things that are said. So hopefully I can lay that to rest. I mean, I'm going to tell you a lot of fantastic things today, or in this series, and it'll be hard to believe, but believe me, it's true. But anyway, with that said, let me go into a more detailed history of Jehovah's Witnesses. I'll go ahead and take their governing body located in Brooklyn off our chart board, and then the founder, Charles Taz Russell, off, and then we'll go to our chart board where I have some prepared charts, and we'll look into a few items about the Jehovah's Witness and some of their history. Okay? Now, if we can go to our chart, bring our camera into play, I like to start this off at the top. As you may see, I'm taking a direct quote from the Watchtower magazine itself. In their April 1st, 1972 issue, they have a quote in there that says, "The Watchtower is no inspired prophet." Okay? And I want to reiterate the fact that I totally agree with that they are not inspired. And I want to ask the question, why do so many of these millions of Jehovah's Witnesses, almost with a blind faith, follow these guys in that building over there in Brooklyn, New York, that we just looked at a minute ago? They're not an inspired prophet, even they say so. So if they're not inspired, then why do people put such faith into this particular organization? Well, hopefully we'll answer that question as we move through this situation. But now, let's go back to the chart and start taking a little closer look at this history of the Jehovah's Witnesses. We've already seen Charles Taz Russell. Of course, he was a man who was born in 1852, and he died in 1916. In fact, he died on Halloween night. It's kind of interesting that he died on that night, but that's the night he died on, in 1916, Halloween. And let's see what we've got here as far as our chart goes. Number one, Charles Taz Russell worked as the manager of several men's clothing stores. He rejected the teachings of eternal punishment at an early age, so he didn't like hell and eternal torment and all those things that are taught in your standard mainline churches. Number three, he began his own Bible class in Pittsburgh at age 18. Okay, in 1876, his class elected him pastor of the group. So he starts his own Bible class. I mentioned he had 6 students. And somewhere in there, they just decide to call him pastor. Okay, he has no formal training. He's a teenager. He starts his class, and somewhere in there, they decide to start calling him a pastor. And I guess sometimes when you're called a pastor, you may be inclined to have an ego trip about it, especially when you're just a teenager. So it might have gone to his head, perhaps. I'm just making some inferences here. Okay, not statements of actual fact, just speculations on that point. But anyway, point 5 here, we have in 1879, I mentioned that a minute ago, the key date, 1879, he founded the Herald of the Morning magazine, which developed eventually into the Watchtower, announcing Jehovah's kingdom. And of course, it initially came out with 6,000 copies to what is now in excess of 17.8 million copies per month in 106 languages, while the other Watchtower periodical, Awake, has a circulation of over 15.6 million per month in 34 languages. So pretty impressive, pretty impressive. He starts with 6,000 copies in 1879, and now, current day statistics, it's in the millions each month all over the world. And I said earlier that there was only like 5 or 6 million Jehovah's Witnesses, but they affect a lot more people than that. There's relatives that are listening to what they have to say. There's associates and friends. So their impact is much greater than just the actual numbers who count themselves as baptized Jehovah's Witnesses. So with that said, let's go back to the chart and find out some more interesting details. We find that Charles Taz Russell was a well-trained speaker and a prolific writer, also authoring many works such as The Three Worlds, The Finished Mystery, and Studies in the Scriptures. Now, I have all 3 of those books with me here on the set right now. And we're going to take some interesting looks into those books and what he had to say at the beginning of Jehovah's Witnesses. We're not going to do it at this moment. I want to work through a little of these charts and get into some of the history here. as we move through this series. So let me just flip the chart around, and we'll continue to take a look at some of the history here. Okay, going back to the chart. Number 7, we have in 1908, he moved his headquarters from Pennsylvania to Brooklyn, New York. And the address, of course, is 17 Hicks Street. So that building we looked at a minute ago on the book cover, that's where it is. That's where he moved it, and that's where it still is today. Okay, now back to the chart. We find that scandals ensued. He had the scandal of the miracle wheat. He was advertising a special miracle wheat that if you paid so much money, you get a sack full of this stuff, and supposedly this wheat would do all kinds of incredible multiplication. You know, you'd have incredible crop produce if you pay him so much money to get it. Of course, it turned out to be a complete scam. We have the literature here from the actual watchtowers and so forth that we're showing that. I can't do it at the moment, but you know, with time flying on us here, I've only got about 6 minutes left, so I want to get as much of this information as I can in the remaining time. But he also, as I mentioned earlier, B here, he had a divorce and alimony payments to his wife, Maria Ackley, and all that involved that he was sleeping with a minor, and that's why he's been called a child molester by some. And that was some of the premise for the divorce that ensued, in that he put his wife aside, even in the same house, and was sleeping with this minor that was staying with him. And this all came out in a court case. We also find that he was charged with perjury on the witness stand, lying under oath, you know, in testimony in court. That came up in some of his court trials. And also we have he was into other money-making schemes to get, you know, scams to get rich quick type of ideas, things of this nature. And we'll get into that maybe as we move through a lot of the actual Watchtower material and shows coming up. But moving back to the chart then, number 9, he admitted that he only attended school about 7 years of his life, and he left school when he was 14 years old. He had no formal theological training, and he could neither read or write biblical Hebrew or Greek. And as I mentioned before, he died October 31st, 1916 on Halloween night. Okay, at his death, another man took over the running of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and this man's name was Judge Joseph Franklin Rutherford, and he lived from 1869 to 1942. And he became temporary president in 1916, the year Russell died, but consolidated his power base to the point that by 1918 he was permanent president. So there's a lot of power plays in there and stuff, and he had to deal with the board of directors and all that kind of thing. And he won out, basically what happened, and he took control in 1918. Okay, 1917, he said the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society was God's only channel of communication, and that he was the steward of Matthew 20, verse 8, in the parable of the penny passage there. So he claimed that he was the steward mentioned in the Bible itself in Matthew chapter 20, verse 8. Now, verse 3, or point 3 here, 1919, he published a separate magazine called The Golden Age, and established service directors to oversee previously autonomous kingdom halls. So now he's starting to implement control. He's starting to get overseers that will keep an eye out on these kingdom halls out there that report back to Rutherford, so he knows what they're up to. And he also at the same time started publishing a separate magazine from the Watchtower magazine called The Golden Age, which, it's interesting, in Russell's will, Russell specifically said that his successors could not publish a separate magazine through this organization. But that's exactly what Rutherford did, published The Golden Age along with the other publication. But anyway, with that said, let's move on then to point number 4. 1923, Rutherford attempted to declare himself the faithful and wise servant of Matthew 24:45, which had been a title granted to Pastor Russell. In earlier Watchtower magazines, Russell claimed to be the faithful and wise servant, the discreet, slave of Matthew 24:45. 1925, Rutherford had major disagreements with the Watchtower editorial staff, and within 6 years he totally disbanded it until he was in absolute control of all Watchtower publications. Declared 1914 as Christ's invisible presence. I don't have time to elaborate. We'll get into that in future shows. 1927, he kicked out remaining Russellites who opposed him and declared the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society as the faithful and wise servant. So it's very interesting. First, earlier in 1923, he declared himself to be that, but then in 1927, they declared the society to be the faithful and wise servant. Okay, 1929, he declared that the higher powers of Romans 13:1 and following was not human government, but Jehovah and his kingdom. So he single-handedly eliminated all Jehovah's Witnesses' allegiance to their governments and made them only allegiant to his organization, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Okay, 1931, they assumed the name of Jehovah's Witnesses. Rutherford considers himself as the mouthpiece, quote, mouthpiece of Jehovah, and he begins to write the Watchtower magazine by himself with no one allowed to see manuscripts beforehand except the vice president, who was Nathan Knorr, Rutherford's personal secretary, Barney Boyd, and the proofreader, Frederick Franz. Okay, so he's got absolute control. By 1931, he's writing the Watchtower magazines all by himself, not letting anyone else look at it until after he's finished. And that's only the proofreader and the other people that just do the final adjustments as they turn it into print. Okay, so these were the only 4 people that had any say or even looked at the publication before it came off the presses there in Brooklyn, New York, where we saw that headquarters. And they started sending out, millions of copies all over the place. But it was mainly written by the hand of one man, Franklin Rutherford. Okay, with that said, let me go to the next chart as we keep our analysis going here. As I turn it over, of course, this is Joseph Franklin Rutherford, the second president we're talking about here. And it's interesting, they came with that name, Jehovah's Witnesses. Kind of a joke I heard from Dwayne McNanny of Witness Incorporated, an outstanding Christian apologetic organization. And I'll be giving their references, and anyone that writes us for information or documentation about anything I have to say during the show, we're more than welcome. Call or write the numbers on your screen. We'll give you plenty of documentation and ministries that deal, not only us, but many other ministries across the nation that deal with Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. But this joke here I got from Dwayne McNanny of Witness Incorporated. I consider him and comments from the Friends, I have to dig around to find it, of David Reed to be probably the 2 best organizations in the country dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses. So we'll be glad to give you their names and addresses so you can write them if you'd like further information. But Dwayne said at a ex-Jehovah's Witness Convention Now session, he said that it's interesting that Joe Rutherford came up with the Jehovah's Witness name because if you say it fast, what do you get? We already established that Joe Rutherford he's in absolute control here by 1931. If you say Jehovah's Witnesses, Jehovah's Witnesses, Jehovah's Witnesses real fast, Jehovah's Witnesses, Jehovah's Witnesses, Joe's Witnesses, Joe's Witnesses, Joe Rutherford. That's my joke. You may not laugh, but it's kind of bad, I know, but I always kind of thought it was kind of cute. But really, so when you think about Jehovah's Witnesses, they are really nothing more than people who are following the teachings of this man I'm talking about right now, Joseph Franklin Rutherford, the second president of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. He came up with a lot of their key doctrines that they believe today. And so really, these people think they're Jehovah's Witnesses, but really, as they interpret Scripture, and we will establish all this, and the documentation's abundant, like I said, we'll provide anyone that wants to call it right, is there that they are not really following Jehovah, they are following this man, Joe Rutherford. And that's why they can legitimately be called Joe's Witnesses instead of Jehovah's Witnesses. But we'll get into all this. I know there's a lot of skeptics out there. May not believe a word I'm saying, I know, but it just takes time to get into all these details. Okay, now let's continue on here with a little history. Try to get through this and then move into some actual documentation. Now up at the top of the chart, point 9, we have major and current Jehovah's Witness beliefs were first explained by Rutherford, such as now this is what I was just talking about a moment ago, vindication of Jehovah's name. And what that means is they say that you've got to have the right name for God. You know, it just doesn't cut it to have like Lord or God. You know, you got to have Jehovah. Okay, so in their particular, we'll get into their Bible. They've got a Bible that's different from everybody else's, called a New World Translation. But they go through and change wherever any other translation would say Lord or God or something. They would take that out and insert the word Jehovah, because they believe Jehovah's name needs to be vindicated. It needs to be shown that that is the true name that God should be called by, Jehovah. Well, we'll have lots to say on that other, but just in case you didn't understand what I was talking about here, it's because they go by that word Jehovah, okay? Vindication of Jehovah's name. They don't like other names. Okay, so B, the good news of the kingdom, 1914 through 1918. Now this gets into their good news that Jesus came invisibly in 1914 and established this invisible second presence and Jehovah's kingdom, and you find it in a inside cover of almost any Awake magazine you happen to pick up. I'll get into those details later. But that's a key doctrine to Jehovah's Witnesses even today, that somehow the end of the world is going to take place based on this 1914 date of the second invisible presence of Christ. And we'll get into more details later. I'm just trying to give you a brief background so I can explain this chart, so I won't leave you in the dark completely. Okay, C, Armageddon explained, and all the details of the end of the world and how it's going to happen. Armageddon explained. D, the concept of theocracy and kingdom organization. As I said earlier in the first program, we didn't really touch on it here, but once Rutherford was in control, he established overseers that went out and kept an eye out, like circuit overseers and stuff, of kingdom halls, and they would report back to the headquarters there in Brooklyn, so they would know what these guys are up to out there across the landscape. So before they were autonomous, but now with these overseers, they're checking up on them, make sure they're falling in step with what Rutherford has in mind for them. And so that's what that's talking about. The concept of theocracy and kingdom organization. You have to have the proper organization, overseers, and everybody marching in step to whatever the headquarters says. E, they get into sales for salvation. They get into all kinds of marketing techniques to go around selling literature, information to get people saved, and also trying to get them on some kind of system to really push them, because the end of the world's coming and they better get out there and publish this good news of the kingdom before the world ends at Armageddon and all that kind of stuff. So that's sort of what that gets into. F, the gospel of Christ was not preached with true understanding until Christ came into his spiritual temple in 1918. Okay, now this is a doctrine that Rutherford really pushed, saying that no one really had any real understanding of what was going on until 1918, when Christ had this invisible second presence in 1914, and in 1918 true understanding was finally allowed to come through the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, with Rutherford running it, because it was in 1918 that Rutherford finally gained power over the board of directors at the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. So once he got power to have a big say on what was going on with the Watchtower organization in 1918, suddenly there was true understanding. Well, anyway, hopefully you'll understand that, but that's how Rutherford looked at it as he tied it in with his 1914 presence. Okay, going back to this then, and of course that leads logically to divine direction of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. So once the true understanding was established, then we know that only true divine direction can come from God, Jehovah's only true organization, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. It only comes through them. Everyone else is apostates, left out in the dark. They'll be destroyed at Armageddon. They're of Satan's empire, and they've had it. Protestants, Catholics, they're all goners. It's only these guys with a true understanding under the divine direction of Jehovah. Okay, so that's what all that's talking about. We'll get into more details. We look through a lot of Jehovah's Witness literature in this series. Okay, hope my voice holds out here. It's been a long day. But anyway, before we even started filming this stuff. But point 10 now. The judge, as he was known, I've already said that he never was really a judge. He was just a lawyer, and He was christened the judge, just like the founder of Jehovah's Witnesses was christened the pastor, even though he was never really a pastor. But anyway, the judge wrote over 100 books and pamphlets translated into over 80 languages by 1941. So he's a big marketer. Right here on stage with me, I've got a ton of books down here in front of me. And here's just a couple I picked up. I've got them all around here, because I'm about to lose my pointer here. But these are written by Rutherford, and we'll get into some of these details. International Bible Students Association, Watchtower, I've got all, and right in here, like this particular one called Reconciliation, right in here, copyright 1928 by J.F. Rutherford. He writes the books. I've got plenty of them, and we're going to take a look at these after we get through all this little history lesson here of Jehovah's Witnesses, see what he has to say. But he is the man that's really established a lot of what Jehovah's Witnesses believe today. If it weren't for him, I guess they'd be stuck with Charles Taze Russell, the founder of them, and what he believed. But we'll find out that there were some major changes made, and also flip-flop back and forth in doctrine and things. But we'll get into that later. Okay, number 11. Rutherford died on January 8, 1942, of cancer at his home in San Diego, California, called, quote, Beth Sarim, end quote, which is translated House of Princes, end quote. Now, there's some ministries that are out there, Christian ministries, that have the title deed to this house, Rutherford's house, Beth Sarim, that's in San Diego, California, because they kept teaching that the end of the world was going to happen over and over again, like in 1918 and 1925 and so forth. And because they were so convinced the end of the world was about to be at hand, they built this big old house with Watchtower, with Jehovah's Witness money. All their faithful followers, they took the money out of their coffers and built this big old mansion out there in San Diego. And they call it Beth Sarim, the House of the Princes, because when all the saints came back when Armageddon and the end of the world came, they wanted a nice place for them to stay. You just can't have Isaac, Abraham, and Jacob and all the Old Testament patriarchs come back. And you got shabby buildings. You got to have a good place for these guys to stay. So the Jehovah's Witnesses took money out of their coffers and built this big old house, big old mansion, out there for all these Old Testament saints to live in. And we have copies of the deed for anyone that wants to write. I don't have it with me at the time of this taping, but there's several Christian ministries like Dwayne McNanny, I mentioned before, of Witness Incorporated, also comments from the Friends with David Reed, I mentioned earlier. Outstanding ministries, they have copies of the actual deed of trust for Beth Sarim in San Diego, and it actually says on there that this is for Isaac, Abraham, Jacob, and a whole bunch of other Old Testament saints, and as soon as the end of the world comes, they get to take over this house that the Jehovah's Witnesses built with their money. Well, the funny thing is, when they predicted the end of the world and all these kind of things, and they didn't happen, well, it's kind of disappointing. Well, when you predict the end of the world in like 1925 and it doesn't happen, you've got this big old mansion you built with all this money, with Jehovah's Witness money. It seems to be a waste not to let somebody get some use out of it. So who better to use the building than the president of the whole organization? So he decided to be a caretaker of this big old mansion they built until the saints could get here. So Charles Taze Russell lived in that big old mansion until the day of his death out in San Diego, California, as one of his homes. Probably he was up in New York a lot of times from Brooklyn handling things also, but he got to be the caretaker, waiting for the saints of the Lord to come back. And I thought that's kind of interesting about Beth Sarim in San Diego. And that building, that mansion's still out there if anyone wants to go and take a look at it. Of course, the Watchtower has since sold it off to somebody who could care less about religion or whatever. And hopefully they like people just to forgive and forget and hope that they never even find out about this. But that's just one more testament. But he died in 1942, and another man took over the organization, Nathan Knorr. Now, I mentioned him earlier when he was the vice president under Rutherford, and he was one of those 4 people that could look at the Watchtower organization. He lived from look at the publications before they actually went to press under Rutherford, 1905 to 1977. and he was the next president, and he really got, he did three major things here. He wasn't flamboyant like the founder, Charles Taze Russell, or the next guy, Rutherford. He wasn't as flamboyant and such an eloquent speaker and very charismatic, but he was a good businessman. He knew how to get things organized and get things rolling on a machine-like basis. And so what we're going to find out here is, number one, he created the Gilead Missionary Training School in South Lansing, New York. So they train a lot of missionaries to really go out into the world and do a lot of die-hard, never say die, missionary work for the Watchtower Bible and Tract. Send those guys out, really hardcore guys that really go all out for them. Number two, he enhanced door-to-door efforts of Jehovah's Witnesses. So he created better business and selling techniques at the door, ways to get people to take the magazine, buy it, and pay for it, and so forth. Just better marketing techniques, you might say. And he had a wide variety that really improved their sales and their marketing, and made it a responsibility of the Jehovah's Witnesses to sign in to mention how many houses they went to each week. They almost made it as a requirement for salvation. You've got to go to so many houses to be a good publisher and a good Jehovah's Witnesses. You got to get out there and do your work in so many houses and log it in with the society and make sure you're not sloughing off and all that kind of stuff. But really enhance those kind of capabilities. And of course, number three here, he reinforced the grip of the society on individuals' lives. So as Rutherford had done, he started to impose even more of a tyrannical rule over them. Frederick W. Franz, 1893, when we made this chart, he was still alive, but he just died here in December 1992. So he was 99 years old. He just died recently. The next guy that's taken him is, what's his name? Henschel. I believe his name is Henschel. I forgot his first name offhand. But this Henschel guy is 72, and he was a vice president. And he just took over in 1993. But Franz was the president from Nor till 1992, December, when he died. Anyway, he stated, faithfully, basically he was faithful to keeping to Russell and Rutherford's teachings as he could best keep them without contradicting. They contradict in a lot of places, we'll find out, but he stayed with them. He oversees Watchtower effort to hide past history, so he covers up a lot of the past history. And finally, as of 1985, 3,024,131 active members were reported, but over 7,792,109 attended the 1985 memorial in New York, and that's coming out of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society's version of the Lord's Supper. I don't have any more time to explain all that, but he faithfully kept the reins going as Jehovah's Witnesses kept increasing their numbers to now they're well over 5 million. All right, well, I've got to go. Time's up. God bless you. Join us next week. Bye-bye.
Check out our websites. BibleQuery.org. This site answers 7,700 Bible questions. HistoryCart.com. This site reveals early church history and doctrine, proving Roman Catholicism is not historically or doctrinally viable. MuslimHope.com. This site is a classic refutation of Islam, a counterfeit religion created by Muhammad. Free newsletters are also available.